Hello friends! Today we're making the Roman shield. So I have a Roman sword, a gladius, and I wanted to make a scutum. That's what this particular shield is called, to go with the sword. And I figured I'd make it an earlier version scutum since I think that Republican Rome, before the Marian reforms, is the most interesting. Now I've goofed around with some shields before. You may have seen my St. George Russian shield behind me, some other videos. And I've also made a very bad Viking shield in the past, so I'm feeling pretty good about this one. So the first thing I'm going to do is ruin this sheet of plywood. It's just a half sheet of 1/4 inch, and I'm going to try bending it with hot water. My hope is that the hot water will soften the glues and steam the wood a bit so that the sheet will take a nice curved set. These shields should have a nice curve to them to help wrap around the body and keep me protected when I have to go fight the Carthaginians, so I want to make sure this one has a good one too. I'm just using these lines and some basic knots to gradually apply more and more pressure to the sheet to achieve that nice curve. I'm actually stressing it well beyond where I want that curve to be, since I know that the wood, even with my janky boiling water trick, will want to flatten out again and won't hold the curve I'm bending it to. Now if I were to do this again, which I actually might because this is kind of fun, I think I'd use 4 lines. That way I could pull them from opposite directions to get a more even curve. I also think I'd go for a heat gun instead of the boiling water, and I would have a lot more patience with this as well. Once I've got it to where I want it, I'll just leave it for a few days to mature to a nice curve. After a bit, I'll take the lines off and cut out the piece that I want. But first, I'm going to take some measurements. With the curve, I want it to be 2 feet across, but full disclosure, I had to measure several times to get a good approximate. You'll see that once the lines come off, I lose a lot of my curve. And you know what they say, measure twice, cut once, or in my case, measure 77 times and cut at least once. Speaking of precision, I'm not sure how I did it, but the hole for my hand ended up being off center. It wasn't enough to make me ditch the project, but it is kind of weird. Once again, as soon as the straps come off, the curve changes. And I also noticed that the curve slowly got less and less pronounced as I worked on it. It never straightened out completely, but I do wish I had been able to achieve a better curve to the shield. Whoops, sorry guys. One thing that I thought was interesting is that the Romans had a horizontal hand grip. I thought it wouldn't be as good as a vertical grip, but after having tried it out a bit, it is actually more efficient for this big ol' shield. It also makes it much easier to carry at your side while you're marching across Spain in pursuit of either of the Hasdrubals, and you can also easily just set it on the ground in front of you when you're not using it actively. I'm also going to cut this into a little bit more of an oval shape. The early scutums were more ovular, and they got more and more square as time went on. I still want it to be kind of square, but I'm definitely going to round those corners quite a bit. These early ones would have also been much more individualized, since the legions of the Manipular army in the Republic were nothing more than peasant militia. Each soldier would have provided his own kit according to his financial status and possibly age. I shaped this handle off camera. It's essentially just a piece of 2x4 that I had cut into a curve and then smoothed out my handhold with a wood rasp. Fun fact, this piece of wood was actually supposed to be the glider of a rocking horse that never quite worked out. Again, the horizontal grip actually does feel good, and I bet I'd be glad of it if I had to carry this thing around for hours. Next, we need a boss. And I went through a lot of back and forth on what kind of a boss I wanted before I finally settled on what I've got. Anyway, I eventually decided to have an all-wood boss with a small spine that didn't run the whole length of the shield. That was actually important since I have a design element that I want to add when I paint the shield later on. You'll see. And one thing you should know is that you can never have too many clamps. I also need to make the contact point on the boss curved since the shield is curved. And I'm really happy to have this belt sander for the task. This sander will get used a lot in this project. And if you don't have a belt sander at home, it's definitely an amazing investment. I'm also going to make the hole more comfortable by rasping off the sharp edges. I know I'm probably not going to be fighting the Carthaginians with this, but I probably will pretend, so it can't hurt to make it comfortable. And now the boss gets sanded. There's probably a more efficient way to do this, but oh well. The nice thing is that I was able to slowly shape the boss, and I think the shape looks nice in the end. I had initially planned on cutting this in half and adding a metal strap to the center of the boss, but after looking at it, I do like the all-wood look, and if I consider that this is for a member of the Hastati or even the Principes who is on the lower side of the property valuations, then the dude might not want to shell out for a metal strap. It will give me some more room on the top and the bottom for that fun decoration later on. Next, I want to cover this with some canvas. I think the historical versions would have been covered with either canvas or leather or both, but I think just the canvas is fine. It will also help cover some of my modern thingies like screws, and it will give me a nice surface to paint onto as well. Anyway, this is just a plain piece of canvas drop cloth that you can get at any hardware store for cheap. I'm going to wet it, glue it down, and then tack it on. And my dog did his best to help with the project too. And also, if you're wondering, yes, I did make this mallet myself. There was no way I was going to shell out $10 for a fancy store-bought mallet. Keep in mind, I am at the low end of the property valuations here, so I've got to save money where I can. By the way, if you want to make a mallet, it's as easy as drilling a hole in one piece of wood and putting another piece of wood into that hole. Anyway, I took my time with this part since I wanted the fit to be good, but I also want to make sure that there's enough meat on the boss to protect my knuckles from spear thrusts and sword swipes and all sorts of things like that. And finally, since I'm pretending that this is real, I'm going to use some stain to pretend that the boss is oak. Then I'll fix that in place with some more glue and screws. By the way, if I haven't told you before, I have a love affair with this Tight Bond 3. I'm not getting any endorsements from them, by the way. I just genuinely love this glue. For wood projects, it's much better than epoxy. It's pretty much waterproof. And once it's dry, I have never had it fail. Now for the painting. Since this is supposed to be a shield from the First Punic War to the end of the Second, I'm not going to do any eagles. For one, I think it's pretty cliche, like how every Fokker triplane has to be the Red Baron. Every shield has to have the eagle and lightning bolts. For another, the eagle was indeed a Roman symbol. Don't get me wrong on that. It was a big symbol for the Punic Wars all the time, but it was Marius who introduced the eagle as the Legion's standard about a century later. So it's a later thing, and I think that the Legion started to become much more uniform after that, especially with his other reforms and things like this. I'm also not going to paint it red. Red is a good color. It is associated with Jupiter and victory and all sorts of other stuff like that, but color's expensive. And remember, my guy isn't at the top of the food chain. Anyway, remember that the Manipular army was a peasant militia, so everyone supplied their own gear, and I presume that they would decorate it themselves. And of course, if you're a nerd like me, you're going to start wondering how. Like, would certain tribes or regions or towns all use the same device on their shields? Would it be more of a family crest? Would there be some sort of combination of all of them? Anyway, I haven't done quite enough research to know with any degree of specificity, but at the very least, I'm going to try to make my shield as Roman as possible without the cliches. First off, I'm going to keep the basic color white because my guy's cheap. As for decorations, aside from the eagle, what could be more Roman of a symbol than she-wolves? The Romulus and Remus myth is one that I'm actually only familiar with from Livy, but I do know that it was a legend from the deep past and it had been recounted by other sources. And I'm betting that a Hastatus or a Principe, whatever, from the late 3rd century BC would know and love that legend, so I'm throwing a pair of ferocious she-wolves on this shield. I also wanted to include a crow, because I think it would be a clever insult to both Gauls and Carthaginians, from the time period I'm aiming at specifically. There's this really cool story about Marcus Valerius Corvus, who got the name from a crow. This guy dueled a giant Gaul, and right before the fight, a raven landed on Marcus's helmet and then helped him in the fight by flying at the Gaul's face and distracting him. So again, the Corvus, the raven, or the crow, is going to be a good little motif here. Also, the Carthaginians might be reminded of their famous navy being defeated in the First Punic War, and one of the wonder weapons that helped the Romans initially was a beaked gangplank that helped the Roman marines to capture Carthaginian ships, and the gangplank was of course known as the Corvus, or crow's beak. So since this shield would have been used around the time of the Battle of Telamon or maybe against Hannibal. I'm hoping that the opponents would get the significance and give my dude some respect. Finally, for the rim, I'm not going to give it any extra reinforcement. I mean, a nice bronze or rawhide rim would actually be a great addition to help it stand up to the rigors of battle, but again, my dude is cheap, so I'm just going to paint around it, and hopefully, in the heat of battle, no one will single him out. And with that, we have a finished Scutum. So here it is, the mighty Scutum. I think the next time there's a bunch of things that I am going to do just a little bit differently. So for example, I'll try to show you the curve here. If you can see, it's not hugely pronounced. It's kind of a, my tobacco, it's kind of a shallow curve, which is okay. I just was hoping for kind of more of like something that wrapped around the body a little bit better there and all of this. It's still fine. I can kind of, I'm pretty much covered up here, so that's cool. But I think a heat gun would have helped with that, and a lot more patience as well. So I think next time I build one of these, which I might do an Imperial one and just do the cliches of the eagles and the lightning bolts and the rectangle and all that, I'll probably definitely be doing something with the heat gun and more patience. Like 2 weeks of letting that wood sit and take that set, that curve, instead of just like a day or two like what I did. Also, in doing my research, because of course I'm a nerd, and then once I start doing this, I start looking up a bunch of things, I noticed that my sword, which goes pretty well with this, right? My sword's out of date. It's anachronistic, I think, because this is supposed to be a Republican Scutum from between the First and the Second Punic Wars. And this is a Gladius Hispanensis, which probably wouldn't have been used in a large way until, well, the Romans had some contact with the Spanish soldiers. And so probably they would have been using this sword at the earliest around around like 200 BC or something like this, right? I mean, it's not impossible that somebody, had a cool sword and they're like, hey, look at my cool new Spanish style sword. And everybody was like, whoa. But it's probably more likely that they had the earlier type swords and all of this. So there is that, which means I have to make a sword, I think, too. So there you are. Anyway, don't worry on that. There's more to come. And so, yeah, this was a fun project for me. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. If you're a regular here on the channel as well, you might be thinking, well, gosh, how come there aren't any models or things like that? Well, there's models coming. I just need to build the thing over here. There's actually a Focke-Wulf 190 that I'm working on right now that I'm pretty excited about. So there's that. But I just decided, hey, since this channel is for fun anyway, why not start doing all of the things that I think are fun? One of the things I don't think is fun is sweating my butt off in this hot garage right now. So I'm going to get going. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you all had fun like I did. I wish you joy in your lives, and I'll see you again soon.